Hello, Year 8. So, as you know, we're moving on to week 2, and our topic for this week was about the environment and looking in particular about the setting of the island and how different characters relate to that setting and how that contrasts with our own perception of it. So, what we're going to do for our discussion of the day today is I'm going to show you an example from my own Year 8 class about perhaps a conventional description of the island, and we're going to have a focus on what is really good about it and what we can take forward from that in our own descriptive writing going forward. And then Miss Pierce and I are going to talk you through more close analysis when it comes to the language and really thinking about what particular words mean and having also a greater awareness of writers' techniques, because in order to kind of progress in English, it's all about being able to identify those techniques, but not only identifying them, but also really explaining how that, builds the meaning of the text and your understanding of it. So I'll share my screen now. This one, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start off by reading to you this extract from Olivia in my class. Thanks, Olivia. The pink lace sky hovered over the hills, which towered over the rest of the island. Down below lay the fresh, almost untouched grass, bursting with wildflowers of every colour, sprouted out from the ground. Small insects were flying around from flower to flower. Bees went to their hives with nectar, and butterflies of the most delicate colours flew in the warm breeze. The bright sun beamed down on the island, creating a warm atmosphere throughout. Surrounding the island was the clear blue water. The sea dribbled onto the soft sand, going back and forth as it did so. Small shells and pebbles were scattered over the sand evenly, like someone had carefully placed each one. The air smelt of holidays and flowers like a dream. So the reason that I think this was really good is because Olivia here has really shown to the reader exactly what is going on within her imagination and really bringing that to life on the page. So Miss Pierce, what kind of comments would you have to say about this and what do you like about it?
I think there's some really great imagery, and I think it's particularly creating a really positive image of the island. I like the first line, so the pink lace sky, so it could literally make you think of the material of like lace, make you think of some fluffy clouds, and it towered over the rest of the island. So I think that's just kind of a nice little juxtaposition there as well. I also like the line, the bright sun beamed down. So it's a little bit of alliteration, I suppose, but you could think of that as literally beaming down, or you could think of that in a way of like personification, like beaming, like smiling. And so I think it's just really effective in creating a really positive, like peaceful atmosphere. I think she's done that really successfully.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think for me, where you picked up on the personification, Olivia said the sea dribbled onto the soft sand. I really think the use of the word dribbled is really effective there. And it gives the island its own characteristics and sort of human qualities in itself, because it is a living and breathing setting and place, which is very much kind of having power over the characters as well as their sort of I guess ownership of it as well. So yeah, I just think in terms of how we can learn from this, really, I would say that Olivia's really gone into lots of detail surrounding everything. So we think she's mentioned here the sky, the grass, the colours, the insects, the sun, the sea, and even the shells and the pebbles, rather than just saying, the island looked very inviting and welcoming and beautiful. She's really teased out so much extra detail here. And as you were saying, Miss Pierce, like the alliteration that she's used, the personification, just make it even more, I would say in my class, is like a bit more like flavoursome. It's a bit more spicy in terms of the words that she's used. It's a bit more exciting. So really good example there from Olivia. So hopefully you can take some tips from this within your own writing. I'm now going to share a passage about the island from the perspective of 4 different characters. I'm going to read that over to you now and try and incorporate the different voices. So Adrian begins then. The air breathes upon us here most sweetly, as if it had lungs and rotten ones. Here is everything advantageous to life. True, save means to live. How lush and lusty the grass looks, how green. The ground indeed is tawny, with an eye of green in it. So we have juxtaposing views here about these characters' perceptions of the island. We have Adrian and Gonzalo really emphasizing how beautiful and refreshing this environment is to them, and how the island is almost a giver of life. And we see that through the very first line in the personification that's been used. The words "the air breathes." Now we know on a literal level, the air doesn't breathe. So therefore, this is an example of personification. Now, personification, in case you've forgotten, is when you're giving something that isn't human characteristics. So the air here isn't obviously human, but it's breathing, as though the island has its own personality and is a living and breathing thing. And the use of the word sweetly, this is an adverb because it features the ly at the end of sweet, suggests that the island is very beautiful and it's bringing fresh life and vitality into the characters' own worlds. However, this is met with Sebastian's comment as if it had lungs, so which obviously kind of continues with this imagery of breathing. But then he says rotten ones. So the use of the word rotten there is obviously tainting this idea of what the island really presents. And we can see that Sebastian has a very different relationship with this landscape. The word advantageous here is used by Gonzalo, which means beneficial. So once again, kind of suggesting that the island is bringing about some life-affirming qualities, how to be there, to experience this environment and this land is actually, a great thing for each character, and they're learning a lot in doing so. Gonzalo here also says how lush and lusty the grass looks. So the word lush is referring to growing vegetation, as though the island offers lots of resources and it's very plentiful for the characters. It's not quite something that kind of withdraws life. It's actually bringing life again, which kind of links with what I've already spoken about at the beginning. And we have that colour imagery and alliteration here to really emphasise that point, I feel. But Antonio is in contrast to that and disagrees, and said he explains how the grass and the ground is tawny. And the word tawny here is a yellow or brown colour, which might be connoting death, or this idea that the life amongst the grass is actually fading, and evocative of ideas towards death, as opposed to the greenery and the lushness that was expressed in the image before it. And Sebastian echoes and repeats that idea of the colour green. But what I want to think about here is how the ground is given an eye of greenery, so perhaps an eye of jealousy within there that Shakespeare's commenting on about Sebastian himself. He's jealous of the power that's playing out in this scene, and therefore has a very different relationship with the island than Adrian and Gonzalo, who see it in a really positive light. Any other further ideas, Miss Pierce, there, or?
I just think that it's been interesting how the island is used to kind of demonstrate how the characters truly are. Like, it reveals their personality. So Gonzalo, he sees it as advantageous to life, so that means that he sees the positive in the situation, whereas the others, seeing it as brown, they're more pessimistic, they're more negative people. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so it's almost like that the island is a shifting environment depending on the character's own relationship with it. And it's interesting, when I was doing some research, one of the directors of the Royal Shakespeare Company in 2006 actually presented the island as a frozen and well, as the frozen Arctic, because I guess in our perception of it, we see it as this sort of warm, paradise idyllic island, whereas actually he tried to subvert that. He tried to change those perceptions of it and center it, yeah, in the coldness and the harsh environment. So I guess that takes on a whole different interpretation and understanding of really what the island provides to the characters.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that it's been left open to interpretation by directors. They could display it in however they want. And there's been lots of like modern recreations of Shakespeare plays where they've gone like in a completely different way, a different time period. And I think that's really interesting. Keeps it exciting.
And I guess it kind of stems from our conversation last week about how we think the Tempest is still very much relevant today. And I think it is through the directors and producers' own different interpretations. The fact that Shakespeare is always in itself, all his texts are living, breathing entities and things that can be shaped and changed and challenged, which means that even for an audience today, we're still able to learn so much from it if we just shift perspective and shift the sort of dynamic in which the play was set to begin with.
Definitely.
So I'll move on to your slide now.
Okay, so this kind of links with what we were saying. So I've said before in my video as well that the island is kind of used to reveal who the characters truly are. So Prospero wanted this because he wanted to get revenge. He wanted them to reveal themselves without like their home comfort, so like their beautiful palaces and cities. So in this extract I'm going to read, Prospero is like preparing to give up the magic. This is the end of the play now. And he's giving up the island, giving up the magic, and all of the facade and sort of fantasies that he's created being taken away. And he's kind of talking about how he used the island as a stage, like a performance of what his revenge, what he wanted to get out of it. So I think this is interesting as well because it kind of shows how all of the characters, when they arrive, a lot of them think about how can we use this island? What can I do with this island? Like Gonzalo, he wants to set it up as a utopia. How can I change it, make it better? And it's kind of like they didn't think about the power that the island could actually have over them. So I'll read it to you and then I'll talk about some of the key terms that are featured in it. So Prospero says, "Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yet all which inherit shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep." So this speech is interesting as well because some people said that it's like quite self-aware. It's almost like he knows that he's in a play. And some people kind of say that it's Shakespeare actually talking like through Prospero because The Tempest was like one of the last plays that he wrote. So it's kind of like Shakespeare's like career coming to an end, which is just an interesting point, I suppose. So in the first line, it says, "Our revels now are ended." So that means the celebration or enjoying oneself in a lively way. So it is a comedy. So he's like messing with them, causing like drama between them as well. So that's all finished now. And he says, "All of this facade and the spirits are melted into air, into thin air." So they've got that repetition there. Into air, into thin air, which just kind of exaggerates the point. Like all of this is over now. It doesn't matter anymore, and that's supported by baseless. But
it also made me think about obviously in the previous extract that I just looked at, the reference to air within that as well, and how that seems to be an extended image within the play as a whole, actually, and how it is this living and breathing thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. So then it says how baseless, so it wasn't based on facts. It was all made up, and it was a vision. And he mentions the cloud-capped towers and the gorgeous palaces, and all of that being taken away from them. It revealed who they truly were, and that's how he was able to mess around with them so much. So when they're in this place, like a barren place with nothing, their true personalities show. And then he even mentions the Great Globe, so he could be mentioning literally the globe, like the world, but it could also be like a reference to Shakespeare's theatre. So that just kind of adds to it being quite self-aware that he's in a play. Breaking the fourth wall, is that it? When they're they know that they're in a performance. And he also calls it an insubstantial pageant. So that insubstantial is like lacking strength, and it was a performance. It was all a show. And then he says at the end, our little life is rounded with a sleep. So the little life, you've got some alliteration in there, that this whole thing wasn't really important. It kind of just shows a bit of growth in Prospero, that he's kind of moved on from everything and he wants to start again. So this is all kind of a bit of a metaphor for like a stage. Could link to the 7 ages of man, like the world's a stage that you might have done in year 7. Yeah, it's just an interesting metaphor kind of for life, I suppose.
Definitely.
Anything to add to that?
I guess for me, I always try to zoom in on pronouns and thinking about what that tells us about a character's relationship with other characters, how they perceive themselves, and their interactions with others. So for me, as we get towards the end of the extract, there is a change from the first person pronoun, which is I, and how this is Prospero's own interpretation, and it changes to we and our, which is first person pronoun plural. So this idea that actually the island is experienced and owned by everybody, which I guess if we link that with power, tells us a lot about Prospero's own journey, because we know that he was very selfish with his use of power, how he tried to, oppress and control the other characters in the play, but by the end of it, he arrives to a different interpretation of power, and actually how this should be something that is shared, and a more democratic use of power. So it's interesting there how we can use the writer's techniques here, Shakespeare's use of language, to enhance our interpretation and to kind of create a more evaluative point, I suppose. Well, I think that's everything we've touched on there. So hopefully that's giving you a bit more of a dip into close analysis. And I guess if I was to summarize the main points from this discussion, is to be thinking about what certain words and phrases mean to us. Why do we think that the writer has included this, and how does that influence our understanding of things? So even if you don't feel very confident yet using the linguistic devices and being able to spot those, you can still talk about words and their meanings. So as Miss Pierce just did with the word globe, on how one level that references the earth, but on another level how that actually references Shakespeare's globe and theatre itself, is just thinking about what those words and connotations mean to you as well, I suppose. Anything to add, Miss Pierce?
I just think it's interesting that we've managed, just from the idea, like the theme of the setting, we've managed to get so much out of it. Like we've managed to find so much out about the characters just through the setting of the play. I think that's interesting and something you can apply to all of the other Shakespeare plays you read as well.
Definitely, yeah. So we're going to leave it there for your discussion of the day today, and we'll be bringing you something equally as interesting and exciting next week. So I'm going to finish the screen now, and we'll leave the conversation there. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.